I'm just going to give a quick introduction of both Nate and Mary, and then I'm going to turn over the floor to Nate. So here's a bit about Nate. Nate Sponsler is an attorney and has worked on product regulatory issues at Gap Incorporated for over 5 years. He launched the Gap Restricted Substance List and Testing Program and continues to manage the program as part of his job responsibilities. As a member of the AFIRM group, he has been active in several task forces, including chairing the AFIRM Toolkit Task Force to completion with the publication of the 2011 AFIRM Supplier Toolkit, which of course is the subject of today's webinar. Mary Grimm works for the Timberland brand, a member of the VF Corporation's family of 35 brands and growing. She launched Timberland's Chemical Product Safety Program in 2009 and continues to manage the program today, as well as other responsibilities at a corporate level around product safety and sustainability within the supply chain. As a member of AFIRM, she has been active in several task force teams, including the AFIRM Supplier Toolkit. And some of you may know that Mary is also a dedicated elected member of the GC3 Advisory Committee. So welcome, Nate and Mary. And Nate, why don't you take it away?
Great. Okay, take control. All right. Well, thank you, Monica, for that introduction. And thank you to the GC3 for hosting this webinar today and giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the toolkit. And of course, thank everyone on the phone today for joining us. And I hope you find this to be a worthwhile presentation and that you can understand what the toolkit's all about after we're done. So what I'm going to do today is actually take you through a slightly modified presentation that I gave at an AFIRM supplier seminar in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, just this past November. AFIRM puts on these events about once every 2 years now, and this one was a huge success. I think we had about 300 suppliers present, and it was very well received. So first, I will just give you a quick background on the AFIRM group and a little bit of background on the toolkit, and then I'll take you through some of the sections of the toolkit just to highlight them. I can't take you through all of it because there's way too much. We don't have enough time, and I don't want to overwhelm you. Okay. So who is AFIRM exactly? Well, as Monica stated, we are the Apparel and Footwear International RSL Management Group, and this is an industry group that was established back in 2004. The original member companies you see listed there were Adidas, C&A, Gap, Levi's, Nike, and Marks & Spencer. Our ranks have grown considerably since then to about 17 brands now. And although you see the logos at the bottom of the slides here, we've actually had several more brands join since our November seminar. So what does AFIRM do exactly? Well, we meet twice a year for approximately 3-day-long meetings to discuss RSL issues. Everything from test methods to specific RSL failures to new legislation restricting chemicals in the footwear and apparel supply chain. And then our big ticket item is educating our supplier base about RSL issues. So we have a number of task forces that run simultaneously and then multiple conference calls throughout the year. The mission, stated simply, is just to reduce the use and impact of harmful substances in the apparel and footwear supply chain. So the various activities that I just mentioned are how we hope to achieve that. And again, supplier education is the big ticket item, and that's what the toolkit is really all about. So current members, you can see our ranks have grown quite a bit. We just welcomed J. Crew, actually, and Wolverine Worldwide. So the group is going strong, and hopefully we will get even more brands interested in joining, since we are trying to promote the idea of RSLs and have more and more companies adopt them. Okay, so what exactly is the toolkit? It's really just a collection of resources to help educate the global apparel and footwear supply chain on the use of harmful substances and how to reduce them. The way I like to describe it is it's kind of the kitchen sink. We're throwing everything we can at them and seeing what sticks. We've got a few sections in the toolkit that are very straightforward, simple, practical examples. We've got other sections that are more technical. For those of you who have been overseas to visit the supply chain for the apparel and footwear supply chain, you'll know there's a very divergent level of technicality. You've got everything from simple mom and pop shops that have little or no chemical technical expertise at all to larger manufacturers who have in-house teams with some technical ability. So we wanted the toolkit to be helpful to anyone who accesses it, and I think we've done just that, as you'll see as we go through the toolkit. Just a quick history on the toolkit. There was an original version published back in October of 2008. A lot of the sections in that toolkit have been carried over and improved in the new toolkit, and we've added some major sections. So when we first published the toolkit, we got some feedback from our suppliers. They mentioned that it seemed to be more geared towards brands, which makes sense since it was brand representatives who wrote it. They wanted more technical information, and they wanted examples of actual RSL issues and how they were corrected. And then, of course, AFIRM always has gotten the request to offer a combined RSL to meet all membership brand requirements. And for that last one, we actually have now published the so-called AFIRM guidance document, which more or less is a combination of the various brand lists, but that's the subject of a different webinar. So the new 2011 AFIRM Supplier Toolkit, and it's definitely still new, even though we're almost 2 years into having published it. We're still just getting the message out and getting more and more traffic to the site. So it was published back in November 2011, and we really tried to respond to the supplier feedback we got after the first toolkit. We changed a lot of the wordings and the tone of the toolkit sections to be geared more towards suppliers. We tried to use language that they would understand more. We gave a lot more detailed information on a lot more chemicals. We improved the formatting and the internal links just to make it a more user-friendly document. And we have now published translations in both Chinese and Vietnamese, and those are accessible on the AFIRM website today. Already we have plans for additional translations this year, and I think we're going to start with Spanish. The key additions that we'll be talking about shortly are actual examples, RSL failures with corrective action examples in a simple format. We actually take RSL issues, actual problems that the membership brands have encountered and how they were resolved and then how they were prevented going forward. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we offer a massive detailed chemical guidance document that really goes into the textile chemistry at a very technical level. So we're trying to hit both ends of the spectrum here. Simple examples for less experienced suppliers, and then a more complex, detailed reference document for more sophisticated suppliers. So here is the actual toolkit itself. You're looking at a screenshot of the table of contents. And the first thing to point out is that the basic content, the toolkit itself wraps up in about 15 pages. The first 15 pages are just basic introductory information. What are restricted substances? Why do we restrict them? Why is it important for suppliers to understand this? What is a restricted substances list? So on and so forth. Very straightforward, not too wordy, but the core technical assistance that the toolkit provides is located in the appendices. It's the bulk of the toolkit, and some of the actual appendices are massive documents. The Appendix F, the detailed chemical guidance document, is, God, it's got to be almost 200 pages of technical material. It's larger than the rest of the toolkit put together. So now I'm going to take you through a few of the sections just to highlight them. And right away here on page 2, we have a simple matrix that shows various substance groups that are traditionally restricted by many brands who now have RSLs. And then we list the fabrications or the materials where they're likely to be found. So very high level, very simple, and just a quick reference document, not much more than that. And then we go to page 4, where we have an extensive table of each of those restricted substances groups. And we talk, well, first we list the group, and then we give a description of where those substances would be found, how they're used. So a little bit more information for the supplier, a quick reference document. They don't need to read a book just to get this basic information. So it's very, very useful, I think. And then all the way into the appendix already, we have Appendix B, the factory management plan. And this was actually carried over from the original toolkit. Unless I'm mistaken, I believe it was Andy Chen from Nike who originally drafted it. And it's really just an outline or a framework to assist a supplier in developing their own RSL program, if you will. We give them a quick to-do list to understand what kind of chemical issues they have in their own raw materials. They can check their own raw materials, the suppliers that they're using. They can have their own testing program. They can analyze the data, so on and so forth. And this is actually the very end of it, and we provide a tracking timetable to set up an RSL plan. So you can see the first target date was earlier this year. So hopefully the suppliers who were present at our Vietnam seminar are well on their way. Appendix D, best practices to avoid RSL issues. Here's where we go into a little bit of actually action-oriented information. We list the material type on the far left, natural fibers, in the first row, and the restricted substance that could be found there or is likely to be found there. And then we talk about the manufacturing technology that could actually introduce the substance, resins to prevent shrinkage, for instance, for formaldehyde. And then we give them a quick one-line statement on how to avoid the restricted substance. So again, still relatively high level, but beginning to get more detail here. So hopefully they find this useful. And it's really, I think it's about 2 or 3 pages. It can be printed out. They can keep it on the factory floor if they find that helpful. So I think it's a useful document. Now, Appendix E. This is a brand new section in the 2011 toolkit. This is the Problem Solution Prevention Library. And here we collected a series of actual RSL issues that the member brands have encountered in the past, how they were resolved, and how to prevent them going forward. And when you open the appendix, it's actually in a PowerPoint format, so you can browse through the chemical groups just by clicking on them in this nifty hexagon format. And I will show you an example of one of those problems. Here's the list of issues that we've included in this draft. I think it's about 25 or 26 or so. And here is an issue that we grouped in the phthalates section. Even though it technically doesn't involve phthalates, it involves a substitute plasticizer that a manufacturer used so as to not use phthalates, which are coming under more and more restrictions legally and both by restricted substances lists of various brands. So what happened is we had a pair of flip-flops, and we got some customer complaints that they were kind of sticky, and they were actually removing the lacquer finish off of wooden floors or furniture if they were stored on wooden furniture. So they were submitted to a lab, and they detected TBC instead of ATBC, which the manufacturer claimed he had used. ATBC is a phthalate alternative, but TBC is actually a solvent for decoding furniture. So clearly someone dropped the ball here. It was either just an oversight, or maybe they were trying to cut costs and they thought TBC would have the same performance but cost less. Either way, it was a problem, so it was fixed. Most of the other problems are more they're more straightforward. They deal with actual chemicals that we do restrict and how they were found and how they were eliminated. Appendix F, the detailed chemical guidance document. This is a beast. This is the, nearly 200-page document that goes into all kinds of detail on textile chemistry. The author is actually Dr. Dieter Sedlak, for those of you on the call who might be familiar with him. He is a German chemist working for Modern Testing Services, and he's definitely one of the world's leading experts in understanding textile chemistry. This document, he had made it available to a few of his clients a few years ago, including Gap, and I took a look at it at the time, and I realized right away that it had a lot of great information in it. But it was very disorganized, and we're dealing with very complex technical issues and chemical terms, and it's written by a native German speaker. So it was in a kind of twisted Germanglish, if you will. So what we did is we got his permission to use it and submitted it to an environmental technical writer who spent the better part of a year reorganizing it, editing it for content, for grammar, highlighting the chemicals, and fixing up some of the diagrams, and generally just really making it a much more readable document to the extent that it can be. So what it does really is it gives a background on the textile industry, and then it goes into basic raw materials, how they're sourced, the chemicals used, everything from pesticides in cotton production to pretreatment chemicals, finishings, coatings, after special effects like water repellency. It's really a great reference, and I wouldn't suggest reading it straightforward. Since it's very long and complex, but it's great as a reference document. If there's a certain chemical that you or our suppliers want to know about, they can find it pretty quickly in the index, or else just open the document and do a word search and find the chemical. So yeah, a lot of great information, and I'll show you a little bit. This is just an example of one subsection that talks about the oxidation of chrome 3 to chrome 6 during the leather tanning process. This one's actually a little bit easier to understand than some of the other sections, which really go into the chemistry in great detail. But again, a great document for reference for our suppliers who would be getting failing test reports for certain chemicals, and maybe they have no idea what they are. Well, they can go to the chemical guidance document and see in what raw materials it's found, why, and then perhaps some insight on how to eliminate it or reduce it to the extent possible. The other great thing that the technical writer did was she wrote out a pretty extensive index of all the chemicals and the various topics. So you can go right to the index and see where in the chemical guidance document they're found. Okay, Appendix G, MSDS, or Material Safety Data Sheet examples. For those of you with any experience dealing with overseas suppliers, you'll know that MSDS sheets are, well, A, they're hard to come by. B, when you do get them, they're often out of date. They're not translated into English, or they're just horribly incomplete or flat out wrong. I was actually overseas a couple of years ago visiting a supplier, and we were looking at the MSDS sheet for an adhesive he was using, and one of the ingredients was testosterone. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't realize testosterone was used in glue. So clearly there's some kind of translation issue going on. But the ongoing joke, of course, is that it probably was a really strong glue. So maybe you want testosterone in your glue. Just a joke. Another time I got an MSDS, I think it was a polyurethane adhesive with free isocyanates in it, and they actually listed methyl isocyanate, which would be really problematic since that was the chemical in the Bhopal disaster. So again, I think that's probably a translation issue. But anyway, what we've done here is we've given them an example of what an MSDS sheet should look like according to the REACH regulation. It's several pages long, and it breaks down what an MSDS should look like section by section with comments on what to look for and what should be included. MSDS sheets are not the savior of RSL issues, but they can certainly help out, especially when there's an intentionally added ingredient that is restricted by the supplier's customers. What we also did in this section, or I should say this appendix, is we included examples of MSDS sheets, what we're looking for, preferred MSDS sheets, and then also MSDS sheets that were not up to par. And we've done that in English and in Chinese, and then obviously in Vietnamese for the Vietnamese translation. Appendix I, screen printing best and worst practices. Here's where we step back and just give what really is basic common sense advice on how to organize a screen print storage facility. And it may seem pretty straightforward or elementary, if you will, but for those of you who have visited screen printing facilities overseas, you'll know that this is actually quite valuable. I've been to some screen printing facilities that look like Jackson Pollock paintings. I mean, they're disasters. Paint everywhere. No lids are on. The shelves are disorganized. There's open buckets on the floor. Just all kinds of contamination going on. So what we do here is we just give them pictures and quick pointers on how to organize their storage facilities, label the drums, organize them correctly by shelf, try not to contaminate things, keep the lids on, keep your MSDS available where it can be easily referenced, and so on and so forth. Then we have Appendix J, frequently asked questions. I think we're up to at least 50 or 60 questions by now. And these are questions that we've actually received at our seminar events. So far we've had at least 2 in Hong Kong, 1 in Shanghai, 1 in Delhi, and then the latest one in Ho Chi Minh City. So we get a lot of questions at the end of the day that we do our best to answer right then and there, but then we take these home with us and we provide better answers and then include them in the toolkit. So I don't think we've added the latest round of questions we've got in Vietnam, so that's something that we need to get on. Appendix L, additional online resources. Here's where we just point them to other resources around the web that would be helpful in managing restricted substances issues. The AFA restricted substances list is listed there. I think we have the Prop 65 link there and a whole host of links. Of course, the drawback is that these are not typically translated into Chinese or Vietnamese or wherever the supplier is contacting them from. And as we all know, links tend to change over time. So anytime you memorialize links in a document like this, sooner or later they're going to expire. So we need to keep updating those as necessary. So the million-dollar question, how has the toolkit been received so far? And clearly it's very hard to quantify. We know that Western brands in Europe and the US have really taken to the toolkit. We've gotten great feedback from them. Companies that have launched RSLs from scratch have relied on the toolkit heavily, and so it's all well and good. But what about our suppliers overseas? It's not so easy to find out. What we do know is that we were getting somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 hits to the toolkit a month before our latest seminar in Vietnam, and then after that it spiked considerably by an order of magnitude. Looks like we got about 100,000 hits in November and December alone. So we did feature the toolkit as the core substance of that seminar. So when you market this stuff, they will look at it. It's like any good product. You really have to get out there and market it. So that's what I've been trying to work on by doing things like this webinar today. As for actual supplier feedback on the content, we haven't gotten a lot of that yet. So I think maybe we should put together a little bit of an outreach effort and see how they're responding to it, and if they have any suggestions or ideas for additions. So looking forward, future toolkit additions, obviously, like I said, we'll await supplier feedback to see what kind of additional resources they want to see. And then any additional ideas that any of you have on the phone here today would be welcomed. One idea that's come up a few times and that I've actually discussed with Joel Tickner at GC3 is the idea of a preferred substances list. So rather than telling supply chain what chemicals not to use, it would be nice to offer them alternatives, so-called safer alternatives that they can use. So I think that's a real opportunity for us, probably within the next year or two, although nothing has been agreed on within the group. There are a few issues with doing that, including various antitrust laws, especially in the US. If we are pointing suppliers toward proprietary chemical formulations or raw chemicals, that could be a problem for us. So we have to be really careful if we move forward with that. But I do think that that's an opportunity that we could work with perhaps GC3 on, since I know this group has some resources that would be really helpful and knows where to look. So here is the actual website to get to the AFIRM Toolkit. You don't even really need to memorize the web link. Just pull up Google, type in AFIRM Toolkit, boom, it's your first result. And then you'll be able to launch the toolkit in English, Chinese, or Vietnamese. And most of the appendices that I went over today are embedded within the toolkit. So you actually go in to the appendix and launch the document, and it will open as well. So, and obviously there's our contact information if you have any ideas or suggestions, or you could also just contact me personally. And that's it for now. I think we can open up the floor for questions. Monica?
Yes. Okay, very good. Let's see. Thanks, Nate. That was great. And I have a question, but I see one here for Libby, so I'm going to start with Libby. We have Libby Summer from US EPA Design for Environment program posing a question. And it says, a safer alternatives list would be a great addition. EPA has a list of safer chemical ingredients that has some relevance to the textile industry. It's called the Safer Chemical Ingredient List, and it's on our website, epa.gov/DFE. All right, so Nate, you've got a starting point, I think, from the EPA DFE program for a list of desired preferred chemicals. And I can make sure you get that link afterward. Yes, okay. And we have a question from Brian Pentilla from PPRC, the Pacific Northwest Pollution Prevention Resource Center. And Brian asks, can you say some more about your white list and antitrust concerns? Aren't you sharing solutions within the AFIRM toolkit anyway?
Well, yes, but we're not joining together and promoting specific suppliers, specific formulations. That's where you get into trouble. And I'm not an antitrust lawyer, just not my specialty. But I know that we always have basic rules when we're meeting that we cannot discuss our suppliers in any detail beyond just in the abstract. So, yeah.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so let me ask just as a follow-up. So do you think it's the case that if you are recommending a kind of generic chemical as a safer alternative, that might be permissible as opposed to recommending some trade name product made by, a known chemical manufacturer? Is that a distinction here?
Yeah, I think so, definitely.
Okay. All right. Let's see. We have a question from J. John, I think the name is. Hang on a second. Oh, this is good. The questions are pouring in. Thanks, everyone. Keep them coming. Does AFIRM have its own RSL? How does it differ from AAFA's RSL? That's the American Apparel and Footwear Association's RSL. Is AFIRM's RSL available in different languages?
Okay. So yes, the AAFA list is based purely on legislated limits around the world. They take the strictest legislated limit in any market anywhere in the world and put that down as their limit. Many AFIRM brands actually start with the AAFA as their base list, but then add additional chemicals based on best industry practice, future legislation, so on and so forth. So is there actually an AFIRM list? Well, yes, we have, although I wouldn't call it that. I would call it a guidance document. We last year published the AFIRM guidance document, which takes each chemical group and the strictest limit by any AFIRM brand and publishes it. It's also available on the AFIRM website, and I believe that it has been translated into Chinese and Vietnamese. So I don't know, Mary, do you have anything more to add to that?
I would just say that it's also for reference for our, we had our supply chains in mind. The guidance list also has color coding to it and, simple, but we've tried to make it so it's, high, mid, and low level of occurrence to indicate high is historically widely used and are regulated by law. Mid occurrence is, known usage. And low occurrence is unlikely to be found or not intentionally used. So it's broken down in a way that we wanted to make it very, we use the term usable, the usability of it, of our audience, so they're able to understand what they should be looking for and what could be an issue. And that also, for RSLs in general, the difference between the AFA and ours is that we get down to what test methods are accepted to be used, again, just as a more usable document specifically for our supply chains.
Okay, thank you. That's a good response. And it looks like we have some more interest in the safer alternatives antitrust issue. Another question from Libby. Might setting criteria for a safer chemical also avoid antitrust issues?
Again, I'm not an antitrust attorney, but I don't think that would pose any problems. You run into muddier waters when you start nominating or specifying specific formulations, specific trade names, proprietary chemicals. That's where you run afoul of U.S. laws. I can't speak for Europe, but I think in the U.S. they're much stricter.
And I would add to that, if I could, that within AFIRM we do, and this is not, we haven't approached it yet, so we always have, I think it's fair to say, robust discussions around these issues and find ways to overcome them. And one great example is the RSL guidance list was 6 years in the making, and part of that was sensitivity issues amongst the brands and their legal teams, everybody having, there's interpretations to regulations and I'll say a brand comfort. So something regarding safer chemicals, the degree with which we're able to list things, I think we'll get there. In no way, just to let our audience know, lots of folks within AFIRM that are aware of this subject think it's fantastic and appropriate and the next logical step. We just haven't gotten to the point. We have an in-person meeting coming up where we will discuss and agree and then get down to the granular issues around, who's on the task force, our objectives, the detail of what we'll accomplish, and any antitrust issues.
Yeah, I think Mary hit that nail on the head there. It took us 6 years just to get the so-called guidance list because various AFIRM members were very uneasy about setting an industry standard and the implications for antitrust issues and potential litigation. So it's tricky, but I think there's probably something we can do and not.
And we will.
Circumvent. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And we just, in case there's any other questions, just to further clarify, you'll see it on the guidance list. We tee it up with saying what the list is and what it's not. And then, the usual caveats apply from a legal statement perspective. And I can envision the same thing will be with the preferred chemicals list.
Yeah, I mean, no AFIRM list is ever going to be the silver bullet for a supplier to meet because different brands use different test methods, different extractions of chemicals. So it's, unless we agreed on all the same test methods, which is another issue, you still really have to look at your individual brand requirements. Suppliers have to look at their individual brand requirements and their test methods to make sure they're compliant.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So we have a question here, and this, you might, Mary and Nate, answer this in kind of a general fashion. I think it might go to your specific company's practices, but you might talk generally about companies in the AFIRM group on this one. It's a question from Lauren Zuli, a Design for Environment engineer with Herman Miller. How frequently are you revisiting raw material formulations for compliance with your RSL? How frequently are you updating the RSL for new chemicals?
Mary, you want to jump on that one?
I can say the easiest one to answer, the RSL update, it is at least once a year or as needed. So depending on what's going on globally for those companies that are global, but for VF Corp and for Timberland, global brands. So if something comes up that we need to address, there's an immediate update. We do, I would say, a major overhaul at least once a year. And then we also have brand initiatives. So if something that an initiative that we're working on that goes beyond what's regulated, is approved and is something we want to communicate to our supply chains, we will also update it and publish.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies brand to brand, but I think typically annually is probably
minimum.
The minimum or the norm. As for the question about raw materials, it really depends on the brand. Some brands have a much longer history as more of a manufacturer. Take some of the major shoe suppliers, like a Nike, for instance. They have more control over raw materials, whereas other brands who are more of an importer retailer, they're going to be testing at the final or finished product stage. And then a really good RSL program is going to look at raw materials and the finished product, because there's a lot more chemistry that goes on between raw materials and the finished product. So you have to be careful about reaction products and contamination and all kinds of things that can happen between just having your raw materials and having the finished good.
Good, okay. Here's a question from James Ewell from Green Blue. How often do AFIRM companies conduct analytical testing to verify compliance with RSLs? Are these random or scheduled? And do AFIRM members share the results with each other to create a more effective network of monitoring and enforcement?
Again, it really varies brand to brand. I think, and it depends on the requirement. Where you have a federal requirement that requires certification, like under CPSIA, then every product has to be tested. There might be other instances where only a certain percentage of products are tested for a certain chemical, just because of the prohibitively expensive cost prohibition. I don't know, Mary, did you want to add to that?
My initial answer is constantly testing, and it is at all different levels of the supply chain. So at the raw material stage, as a requirement for approval, and then there is random testing, and that could be material or finished product. And there's also production testing, which is kind of a hybrid. It's not random, but it is at some point during the production process, and it is communicated that it will be conducted. So, there's lots of different approaches, and you need to consider, or some companies, brands may consider the risks involved. The volume of material or article that you're producing, the end use, and the category. I know kids product is a higher level of risk. It's another risk that is just a risk category consideration when evaluating manufacturing practices, raw materials, and finished goods. Much to the chagrin of some of our supply chain, we apply our kids limit, if you will, our approach to all of our products. We don't necessarily distinguish between kids and adults. Obviously, for two reasons. We consider it a best practice, but also we're managing to one standard instead of two, and it reduces complexity. But it's one approach. All supply chains are very, very different. But I think by and large, and I think Nate can speak to this also, we know from our brands that we work within AFIRM that there is a very high degree of testing, and it is both dictated by a brand's program and legal requirements and, necessity, because an unknown is definitely considered a risk.
Yeah, and just to add to that, based on testing performance, AFIRM brands can develop a supplier scorecard. If a supplier has not had any issues over a long testing period, then they're going to get tested less frequently. Whereas suppliers that are clearly having more RS issues, they will get targeted and tested more frequently and get more attention. So, I mean, like any good business, you have to prioritize. I think the other question she had was about sharing data. That topic has come up at AFIRM, and we do have the potential to do that, although we haven't actually compared hard data. We do compare war stories, so to speak. If there's a restricted substance that's becoming more of an issue or it's under regulation somewhere, we'll talk about it and talk about our experiences and whether we're finding it or not. But we haven't gotten to the point where we're actually analyzing our testing data collectively, but it has come up.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from John Epen. He says first that it's not good to have too many RSLs, not good for suppliers. Any reason why you do not adopt the AAFA RSL? AAFA is planning to list best practices. Will you then adopt it?
Well, it would depend on what they're listing for best practices and where they're getting that information. Brands restrict more than AAFA restricts because, like I said, AAFA is only current legal restrictions. And when you're dealing with legislation like REACH in Europe, you have to forecast which chemicals are going to be restricted down the line so you can get them phased out of the supply chain earlier rather than later. Supply chain is big and bulky, and it takes a long time to get chemicals out. So we do have to do a bit of forecasting. But I'd be curious to see what they come up with as far as best practice is concerned. And actually, now that I think about it, I think they are going to be referencing the AFIRM guidance list within their own list. So there's some kind of reflexive pointing at each other here. So I'd have to look more into that.
Great.
And I'd like to put some context on that if
yes.
I could. Some of the AFIRM brand members are also, if you look at the RSL, the AFA RSL, Elizabeth Traynor is listed, and so are some members of the brands as reviewers and contributors. And AFIRM has actually reviewed RSLs for AFA, but to Nate's point, a lot of the brands go beyond what's regulated because of brand requirements and end product requirements. So I don't know that they're, and understood, we hear it from our suppliers all the time. That was actually why the guidance document came out. They said, just give us one so we can just manage that because that's what we're doing anyway. But between the AFA and AFIRM, we often collaborate on issues and work together and support each other, but I don't know that the objective of each RSL list will ever be precisely the same.
Yeah, we're dealing with different products, different markets, different approaches towards chemical management. Some people are, like I said, forecasting into the future. If they sell in Europe, under the REACH legislation in Europe, there are more and more chemicals that are making it onto their so-called SVHC list, substances of very high concern. And once a chemical makes it to that list, you have reporting obligations, you have to respond to customer inquiries, and then there's the possibility of a phase-out. So for a brand that's not selling in Europe, they're not going to be paying as much attention to that, whereas brands that are in Europe are, and they have to have some idea of whether these chemicals are showing up and start eliminating them if necessary.
It seems that Monica might have dropped the call. So, I guess we can, we only have a few more minutes until the webinar is supposed to be ending. So is there, anything else that Mary or you, Nate, want to share at this point based on the webinar?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
Mary? Yeah.
I can, I would add, both to additionally welcome comments between the groups, between Nate, myself, and there's other, I know GC3 members are also brands that are on AFIRM, and I think we have some on the call. I think New Balance is on the call and Nike, and we all work together in these in varied working groups that we're all working hard on and working on tools. And if there are things now that you know a little bit more about AFIRM, if there are items that you think, wow, that might be a great tool that for AFIRM to develop a project, we're certainly open to ideas. There's enough out there that divide and conquer is going to serve the industry globally. and we're very interested in that. And we're still making decisions about big projects as we have finished this one, which Nate went through the toolkit, was a really big one for us. We have some smaller ones that we're working on, but certainly looking for some bigger initiatives.
Okay, great.
I have the Q&A open, so we can answer some more questions since we have more time.
Yep.
Okay, so I see one here from Bob Buck. What toolkit adoption and use metrics are being used by AFIRM? Well, we can gather website traffic and see how many unique hits we're getting to the toolkit, how often unique visitors are staying on the toolkit and looking at it. I mean, that's a great question. How do we measure that? And I think we do need to put some time and effort into understanding whether they're really making the best use of it and if they're finding it helpful. But right now, we're just trying to get the message out that the toolkit's there. We're trying to get it translated and making sure people look at it more. I got a question here about my contact information. Sarah, can we just send that out later on to the people who have subscribed to the webinar?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, this is Monica back on.
Oh, hey, Monica.
Hey, I just was unceremoniously dropped from the call, so sorry about that. There are a couple of other questions. Can we just spend a couple more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's some good ones. Okay. Let me just see here. There was a good one from Rich Learoff. Back to the antitrust issue here. Actually, this is more of a comment. Rich is mentioning that, let's see, regarding antitrust issues and specifying criteria for safer alternatives rather than specifying proprietary chemicals, the Formulators Roundtable of the Green Chemistry Institute has published a list of performance and toxicity specs that they're looking for with regard to safer cleaning chemicals. So maybe that could be a resource for this. I guess you could say, Nate and Mary, there seems to be a real interest among the group on this issue of providing information on safer alternatives, preferred chemicals. So we'll compile some of these resources that folks are writing in about.
Yeah, just a word on that. Yeah, I totally agree. However, when I hear things like setting criteria, I think we're starting to get a little too abstract for our supply chain. We need to be very direct and straightforward with them. We need to just give them a list, like, hey, stop using APEOs. Here are 6 chemical groups that you should use in place of them. We don't need to give them more guidance documents of understanding how to rate toxicity and evaluate different metrics. Like, we just tell them what to use. That's how they respond. That's what they know. These are businesses. They need to be told what to do, basically, by their customers.
Let me follow up on that with a question of my own. That's a great segue. In the U.S., there has been over, to my knowledge, the past 20, 25 years, some very, very good resources for manufacturers to help them make those kinds of changes, Nate, that you're describing. As you know, in some cases, it's not as simple as replacing one chemical with another. We're lucky if we can find a drop-in replacement, but oftentimes it's not that simple. So in the U.S., we have had a network of state pollution prevention technical assistance programs that have been working with manufacturers over the years to help them make those kind of changes. And we've also had consultants that over time have become quite sophisticated in helping companies with these technical challenges. So I guess really if you reflect on your experience working with suppliers in the countries that are doing the manufacturing for your companies, to what degree are these companies really able to access and utilize this information and make these changes? And is there any infrastructure to help them, or do you see that type of infrastructure emerging over time?
That's a multi-layered question.
Yeah. Sorry.
I would say from my experience, just to repeat what I said before, the more direct we are, the better. I think they're going to listen to their customers first and foremost. We're the ones that are keeping their lights on. When we set a restriction or we demand something of them, they typically come around to it to the extent that they can, technically. Sometimes it takes a while, but to send them off into an abstract world of third-party resources, and maybe that's going to be helpful for some of them, but you really need to get on the ground there with a brand representative and basically tell them what to do. That's how they respond. So maybe I didn't quite address your entire question, but
no, that gives me a flavor. And Mary, do you have anything to add on that?
It is quite the complex question, but I would say that the infrastructure is not there, and it is definitely on the brand. And I think we've seen that globally through a lot of through a lot of examples that the brands are really held responsible, even without support on the ground and infrastructure on the ground. I do see within our own supply chain seeds of it. So there are companies that they have a lot of money at stake, a lot of manufacturers that this is their business, and they recognize there's a niche here, there's a need, and there are partnerships. It's not enough. It's the few. So you just think in terms of a volume of consumer goods, the seeds are there. So hopefully that addresses a little bit more, gives you more of a flavor of where we are. I think it's just the early stages of the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
We're getting some feedback.
Whoa, we're getting feedback. A great time to end this call. So it's 2 minutes past the hour. I just want to thank everyone for participating. It's been a very interesting call. Thank you, Nate and Mary, for preparing and for your wonderful presentation and answering questions. We're very grateful for the work to prepare and to be on the call. And I just wanted to make a quick plug for the upcoming GC3 Roundtable, May 8th through 10th. It'll be hosted by Johnson & Johnson in New Brunswick, New Jersey this year, and we are working on the agenda. I think, as always, it's going to be a great meeting, so please mark your calendars if you haven't already, and plan to be there. There'll be more of this type of exciting, interesting presentations and great insights from folks like Nate and Mary. So thank you all, and we look forward to hearing you or seeing you on future webinars. Take care. Bye-bye.